Hey guys, tonight we're diving straight into one of the less glamorous sides of ancient Greece. Not the philosophers, not the heroes, not the people who actually get remembered, but the ones doing jobs that make you question how civilization even functioned. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always interesting to see who's awake and questioning history with me. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's get into it. Your job description is simple. Destroy someone emotionally, but make it entertaining. In the world of ancient Greece, especially in lively cities like Athens, words were not just tools of communication. They were weapons, art forms, public spectacles, and if you were particularly talented with them, you could turn insults into a full-time career. Yes, you heard that right. You wake up in the morning, stretch, maybe grab some bread and olives, and then head out to professionally humiliate strangers. Not because you're having a bad day, because this is your day. Now this wasn't just random shouting. That would make you a nuisance. Greece already had plenty of those for free. No, this was refined humiliation. Insults crafted with precision, timing, and just enough creativity to make the crowd laugh, while the victims slowly reconsidered every decision that led them outside that morning. Imagine walking through the marketplace, minding your own business, when suddenly a man locks eyes with you and loudly compares your face to a poorly carved statue of a donkey that somehow lost a war. The crowd laughs. You pause. You check your reflection in a bronze shield. You accept your fate. And the worst part? He didn't even know you. You were just available. This role thrived during festivals, theatrical performances, and public gatherings where entertainment meant pushing boundaries. Comedy in ancient Greece wasn't subtle. It didn't gently tease. It grabbed your dignity, dragged it into the street, and asked the audience if they had any notes. Playwrights like Aristophanes made entire careers out of this, turning politicians, philosophers, and anyone remotely important into walking punchlines. If you were famous, you were fair game. If you weren't famous, congratulations, today might be your debut. And if you think you could just insult him back, no. This is a trained professional. This man wakes up and sharpens his vocabulary like a sword. You, on the other hand, are still trying to think of a comeback that doesn't involve the word stupid. By the time you respond, he's already moved on, verbally dismantling someone else's confidence 2 stalls down. So while ancient Greece gave us philosophy, democracy, and the foundations of Western thought, it also gave us the first recorded example of someone getting paid to roast you in public, which really puts things into perspective. Because thousands of years later, we just call it the internet. If the first job bruised your ego, this one might end your entire career. Permanently, in parts of ancient Greece, when things went wrong, and by wrong, we mean plagues, famines, disasters, or just a general sense that life was not going well, the solution wasn't always practical. It was symbolic. Enter the pharmakos, the human scapegoat. Your role? Absorb all the bad luck, sins, and misfortunes of the entire community. Which sounds impressive until you realize there is no training, no salary, and absolutely no retirement plan. Typically, the pharmakos was someone already on the margins of society. A criminal, a slave, or just someone unlucky enough to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Not exactly a competitive job application process. Once selected, you were paraded through the city, often during festivals, while people shouted insults, threw things, and generally treated you like a walking error message. It's less public service and more public blame. The idea was simple. Transfer all the bad energy onto one person, and then remove that person from the city. Sometimes that meant exile, sometimes it meant something worse. Either way, the message was clear. It's not us. It's you. Which, to be fair, is still a very popular strategy today. Now, from the outside, this might seem incredibly unfair, and that's because it absolutely was. But in a time when people didn't understand disease, weather patterns, or random misfortune, they needed an explanation. And more importantly, they needed a solution, preferably one that didn't involve changing their own behavior. So instead of fixing the problem, they removed a person. Problem solved. emotionally at least. And if you think this job had any perks, maybe respect, gratitude, a nice send-off, no. You were essentially the human version of taking out the trash, except the trash could think. What makes it even more unsettling is how ritualized it became. This wasn't chaos. It was organized, planned, almost ceremonial, which somehow makes it worse, because nothing says, "We've thought this through," quite like collectively deciding one person should carry everyone else's problems and then leave. So while ancient Greece gave us logic, philosophy, and early science, it also gave us a job where your main responsibility was to be blamed for everything, and then disappear. Not exactly something you'd proudly list on your resume. After everything you've seen so far, you might be thinking, surely things get better. They don't. They just get wetter. In the political heart of Athens, public speaking wasn't just common, it was everything. Citizens gathered, argued, shouted, and delivered passionate speeches about democracy, war, taxes, and why the other guy was clearly wrong. And when we say passionate, we mean very passionate. Lots of shouting, lots of gesturing, and unfortunately, lots of spitting, which is where you come in. As the sponge bearer, your job? Stand next to an important speaker. Someone powerful, respected, possibly sweating through a dramatic argument about the fate of the city, and hold a sponge on a stick. Not a symbol, not decorative, a literal sponge. Your entire role is to step in, mid-speech, and gently wipe the speaker's face, maybe their forehead, possibly their mouth if things get enthusiastic. Imagine delivering the speech of your life, building tension, raising your voice, pointing dramatically into the crowd, and then a man quietly leans in and dabs your chin like you're a leaking amphora. The crowd watches, no one questions it. This is normal. Now, to be fair, hygiene standards were different. Public spaces were crowded, speeches could last a long time, and there were no tissues, no napkins, and definitely no discreet ways to deal with sweat. So instead you had a human solution. You, standing there, ready, sponge in hand, waiting for your moment. And timing mattered. Too early, and you interrupt the speech. Too late, and the speaker is now visibly dripping, which is not great for credibility. You are not just cleaning, you are maintaining political dignity. One wrong move, and suddenly the man arguing for military strategy looks like he just ran a marathon in armor. And if you think this job came with recognition, no. No one applauds the sponge bearer. No one thanks the sponge bearer. You are invisible, a silent guardian of moisture control. So while ancient Greece gave us democracy, debate, and the foundations of public discourse, it also gave us the guy whose entire purpose was to stand next to powerful men and quietly manage their sweat. History remembers the speeches. It forgets the sponge. By now you might be thinking, at least this next job won't involve humiliation in public. That is a bold assumption. Welcome to one of the least glamorous roles in ancient Greece, the public toilet attendant, a position that answers the question no one asked. What if your entire career revolved around other people's worst moments? Public toilets did exist, especially in larger cities like Athens. But if you're imagining anything even remotely modern, go ahead and lower your expectations significantly. We're talking long stone benches with holes cut into them, no dividers, no privacy, just you and several strangers sitting side by side, making eye contact you will never emotionally recover from. And you are the one in charge. Your responsibilities likely included keeping the area somewhat clean, making sure things didn't completely descend into chaos, and possibly providing materials for personal use, which at the time were not exactly luxurious. Think sponges. Shared sponges. Yes, let that thought settle for a moment. You are not just maintaining a facility, you are managing a situation, a very delicate situation. Now imagine the sounds, the smells, the atmosphere. This is not a place people linger in for philosophical discussion. Although, given ancient Greece, someone probably tried. And through all of this, you must remain calm, professional, and somehow still committed to your role. Because if you don't do your job, things get worse. Much worse. You are essentially the last line of defense between civilization and complete biological chaos. No pressure. And let's talk about status for a moment. This was not a prestigious role. No one introduces you at a dinner party like, yes, this is the man who ensures the smooth operation of our public sanitation. No, you are simply there. Essential. Necessary. Completely uncelebrated. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Without people like you, cities don't function. Hygiene collapses. Disease spreads. Society slowly unravels. So while philosophers debated ethics and politicians argued policy, you were doing something far more immediate. You were keeping things under control, literally. So yes, ancient Greece gave us art, science, and the foundations of Western civilization. But it also relied heavily on someone whose job was to stand near a row of stone toilets and make sure nothing went terribly, horribly wrong. A true unsung hero. Just maybe not one you want to trade places with. At this point, you might be hoping for a job that's at least a little more dignified. Good news. This one involves emotion, ritual, and deep human expression. Bad news. None of it is yours. Welcome to the life of the professional mourner. In ancient Greece, funerals were not quiet, reflective moments. They were loud, dramatic, and very public displays of grief. The more intense the mourning, the more respected the deceased appeared, which creates a small problem. What if the family isn't that emotional? Simple. You hire someone who is. Your job is to show up, often dressed appropriately, and begin crying, loudly, convincingly, with full commitment. We're talking wailing, chest beating, possibly collapsing to your knees. The whole performance. And remember, you may have met the deceased approximately 5 minutes ago. Maybe, if you're lucky, but that doesn't matter. What matters is the performance. Because in this society, grief isn't just felt. It's displayed. Publicly, dramatically, repeatedly. And you are a specialist. Imagine standing beside a grieving family, unleashing a level of sorrow so intense that people start wondering if you were secretly closer to the deceased than anyone else. Meanwhile, you're internally thinking, was his name Nikos? Or was it Demetrios? Details are not your priority. Emotion is. Now, to be fair, this wasn't considered strange at the time. Ritual mourning had deep cultural and even spiritual significance. Loud expressions of grief were believed to honor the dead and help guide them into the afterlife. So in a way, you are helping. You're just also acting very convincingly. And like any good performance, timing is everything. Cry too early and you seem dramatic. Cry too late and you miss your moment. Cry at the wrong person and suddenly things get awkward very quickly. Precision matters. But let's be honest, this job required a certain level of emotional flexibility. One day you're mourning an elderly man, the next day someone entirely different. Same intensity, same tears, different name. You are essentially running an emotional marathon for strangers. So while ancient Greece gave us tragedy, theatre, and some of the greatest dramatic works in history, it also gave us people whose job was to cry on command at funerals. And honestly, some modern actors would respect the skill, even if the audience was a little quieter. By now, you might be hoping for a job that's at least a little more technical, less emotional, less sponge-related. Congratulations. You've been promoted. Your new responsibility? Watch water very carefully. In the courts of ancient Greece, especially in places like Athens, time mattered a lot. Legal cases, political debates, and public speeches all had strict time limits, but there were no wristwatches. No clocks on the wall, so they used a device called a water clock, or clepsydra. And you are the one in charge of it. The system was simple. Water flowed from one container to another at a steady rate. When the water ran out, time was up. In theory, elegant. In practice, stressful. Because your entire job is to sit there and stare at water slowly draining, making sure everything stays fair and accurate. Too fast, and someone loses their chance to speak. Too slow, and suddenly the court session lasts forever. You are not just watching water. You are controlling arguments, verdicts, and possibly the fate of someone's entire life. No pressure. Now imagine a heated courtroom. 2 men shouting over each other, making passionate arguments, accusing one another of crimes, betrayal, and probably bad parenting. The crowd is invested. Tension is high. And you are sitting quietly, watching a bowl. At some point, the speaker gets dramatic. He raises his voice, gestures wildly, maybe even wipes sweat off his face. hopefully with the help of your colleague from the previous chapter. He's building to his final powerful point, and then you say time's up. That's it. Mid-sentence, mid-argument, possibly midlife crisis. You just cut him off, which, as you can imagine, makes you extremely popular. People love the water clock watcher, especially when they lose. Now, technically, you are just enforcing fairness. The rules are clear. Everyone gets the same amount of time. It's a system built on equality. But emotionally, you are the person who ends speeches. You are the human embodiment of wrap it up. And if anything goes wrong, if the water flow isn't consistent, if the container leaks, if someone accuses you of bias, suddenly it's not just about time anymore. It's about justice. So while ancient Greece gave us law, democracy, and structured debate, it also gave us the person whose entire job was to sit there and make sure water behaved itself. A quiet role, a simple role, a surprisingly powerful role, and one that proves once again that history is held together by people doing very strange jobs, extremely seriously. At this point, you might be thinking, surely decisions in ancient Greece were made through logic, debate, and careful reasoning. And sometimes, yes. Other times, they asked a chicken. Welcome to one of the more surreal roles in ancient Greece, the sacred animal observer. And in your case, your entire professional credibility depends on carefully watching a bird eat. Your job is to interpret omens, signs from the gods, messages hidden in everyday behavior, except instead of studying the stars or reading complex symbols, you are staring at a chicken, waiting to see how enthusiastically it pecks at grain. If the chicken eats eagerly on good news, the gods approve. If the chicken hesitates, not great. Maybe delay that important decision. Possibly cancel it entirely. If the chicken walks away, well, that's a problem. Now imagine the pressure. A group of important men stand nearby, discussing whether to make a major decision. Something involving trade, politics, or even war. They turn to you, not for advice, for poultry analysis. You crouch slightly. You observe. The chicken pecks once, twice, then pauses. Everyone leans in. You nod slowly, as if decoding something profound. Inside, you are thinking, this bird has no idea it's deciding the future of an entire city. But outwardly, you remain calm, confident, professional, because your interpretation matters. Say the omen is good and things go badly, that's on you. Say it's bad and they ignore an opportunity, also on you. You are essentially translating chicken behavior into divine will. No training manual, no second opinions, just you, and a very unaware animal. And let's be honest, chickens are not known for consistency. One day they eat like champions. The next day, they stare into the distance, like they've unlocked some existential truth. So your job is not just observation, it's improvisation. Convincing improvisation. Because no one wants to hear, I'm not sure the chicken seems distracted today. You need certainty, even if the chicken clearly does not. So while ancient Greece gave us philosophy, logic, and early scientific thinking, it also trusted major decisions to someone whose expertise was interpreting the eating habits of a bird, a role that requires patience, confidence, and a very straight face. Because if you start laughing, the whole system falls apart. At last, a job involving health, fitness, and personal care. Unfortunately, it is not your personal care. Welcome to the gymnasium of ancient Greece, where men trained, exercised, wrestled, and proudly displayed their athletic physiques, and where you scrape them. After working out, Greek athletes didn't just shower. Instead, they covered themselves in oil before exercising, and once they were done, they used a curved metal tool called a strigil to scrape off the mixture of oil, sweat, and dust. It was considered cleansing, refreshing, completely normal. But here's the important detail. Some individuals, particularly the wealthy or important, preferred not to do this themselves, which is where you come in. Your job is to stand beside a fully grown, very sweaty man and scrape his body clean, professionally, systematically, without making it awkward, which is impressive, because everything about this situation is already awkward. Imagine it. The athlete finishes training, he stretches, he nods at you, and you step forward, tool in hand, ready to begin what can only be described as the world's least glamorous exfoliation routine. You start with the arms, Then the shoulders, the back, the legs. Careful, controlled, efficient. You are not just removing sweat. You are maintaining hygiene, status, and a certain level of dignity, or at least trying to. Now, to be fair, this wasn't considered strange at the time. Physical fitness was central to Greek culture, and the gymnasium was a place of social interaction, education, and training. The act of scraping was part of a larger routine, almost ritualistic, but still, you are scraping another man's sweat for a living. And if you're good at it, you might build a reputation, people might request you specifically, which is both impressive and slightly concerning. There's also an element of trust involved. Too rough and you hurt the client. Too gentle and you're not doing your job properly. You must find the perfect balance, which is not something you expected to master in life. So while ancient Greece gave us the foundations of athletic culture, physical excellence, and disciplined training, it also relied on someone whose job was to stand nearby with a curved piece of metal and politely remove evidence of effort. A quiet role, a necessary role, and one that really makes you appreciate modern showers. Finally, a job that sounds heroic. Fire, running, competition, energy. What could possibly go wrong? Welcome to the world of torch races, one of the more exciting public events in ancient Greece. Runners would carry lit torches across distances, often as part of religious festivals, trying to reach the finish line before the flame went out. It sounds impressive. It is impressive, but you are not the runner. You are the person organizing it, which means while everyone else enjoys the spectacle, you are quietly managing a situation that involves multiple people sprinting around with open flames through crowded areas. During public celebrations, no pressure. Your responsibilities start long before the race begins. You need to select participants, plan the route, and make sure everything is properly prepared. The torches must be lit at the right time, handed off correctly, and kept burning throughout the race. Because if the flame goes out, the runner is disqualified. And if multiple flames go out, congratulations, you now have a confused crowd and a very awkward ceremony. But let's talk about the real issue here. Fire. You are coordinating an event where failure doesn't just mean losing. It could mean accidentally setting something, or someone, on fire. Clothing, wooden structures, decorative elements, all highly flammable. And yet, here you are, encouraging people to run faster while holding flames. It's less organized sport and more controlled risk. Now imagine the chaos if something goes wrong. A runner trips, a torch drops, a small flame becomes a slightly less small flame. Everyone turns to you, because this was your idea, even if it wasn't. Even if this tradition existed long before you. At this moment, you are responsible. And yet, when everything goes right, when the runners move smoothly, the torches stay lit, and the crowd cheers as the final flame crosses the line, no one thinks about you. They celebrate the winner. They admire the spectacle. You remain behind the scenes, quietly relieved that nothing caught fire. So while ancient Greece gave us athletic competition, public festivals, and traditions that still echo today, it also relied on someone whose job was to coordinate a race involving speed, pressure, and literal fire. A role that requires planning, calmness, and a strong appreciation for things not burning down, which honestly is a skill that never goes out of style. At this point, you might be hoping for a job that's a little more peaceful. Something quiet, reflective, maybe involving writing. Good news, this one involves writing. Bad news, you are writing curses. Welcome to the profession of the curse tablet writer, one of the more creatively hostile roles in ancient Greece. When people had problems, business rivalries, romantic betrayals, legal disputes, or just general dislike, they didn't always confront them directly. That would require effort. Instead, they came to you. Your job is to take their frustrations and turn them into carefully worded requests to the gods, asking for very specific misfortunes to happen to someone else. These curses were usually inscribed onto thin sheets of lead, known as diffictiones. The material itself was chosen for a reason. Cold, heavy, and associated with the underworld. So right away, the tone is not exactly cheerful. A typical client might approach you and say something like, "I would like my business competitor to fail, lose all customers, and possibly trip in public." And you, as a professional, nod thoughtfully and begin composing. Not just anything, though. This isn't casual complaining. This is structured, intentional, and often disturbingly detailed. You invoke deities. You specify names. You describe exactly what should happen, sometimes down to the smallest inconvenience. May his deals collapse, his words falter, and his sandals betray him at the worst possible moment. You are not just writing. You are crafting targeted misfortune. Now, once the tablet is complete, it doesn't just sit on a shelf. It is often folded, sometimes pierced with nails, and then placed somewhere meaningful, buried in the ground, thrown into a well, or left in a sacred space. The idea is to deliver the message directly to the gods, or to whatever forces are listening. And you move on to the next client, who probably also has a very specific list of grievances. Now imagine doing this all day, listening to complaints, translating them into formal curses, and maintaining a straight face while someone insists that their neighbour's goat is clearly part of a larger conspiracy. You are not judging, you are writing professionally. So while ancient Greece gave us literature, poetry, and the foundations of written expression, it also gave us people whose job was to take everyday annoyance and escalate it into supernatural intervention. A role that requires creativity, patience, and a surprising tolerance for pettiness. Because sometimes the greatest dramas in history start with someone being mildly inconvenienced. After dealing with curses and divine complaints, you might be hoping for a job that feels a little more grounded, something practical, something simple. Unfortunately, you are about to walk into a marketplace, and your job is to make it quieter. Welcome to one of the most quietly impossible roles in ancient Greece, the market noise regulator. Markets were the heart of daily life. People shouted to sell goods, argued over prices, called out to friends, debated politics, and occasionally just yelled because someone else was yelling. It was loud, constantly loud, the kind of loud that makes you question your life choices within 5 minutes. And your job? Walk into this chaos and politely ask everyone to lower their voices. Yes, that's the plan. You are essentially a human attempt at volume control in a place designed to ignore volume control. Imagine it. A crowded space filled with merchants aggressively promoting their olives, fish, pottery, and whatever else they're trying to sell. Customers are bargaining like their life depends on saving a few coins. 2 philosophers are arguing about existence near a fruit stand. And then there's you. Please, a bit quieter. No one hears you. You try again, slightly louder this time, which defeats the purpose, but at least you're committed. Now technically, this role existed for a reason. Excessive noise could disrupt order, cause confusion, and make it harder to conduct business efficiently. So in theory, maintaining some level of control made sense. In practice, you are outnumbered, severely. And let's not forget, these are not calm, patient individuals. These are people who have been negotiating loudly all day. Asking them to lower their voices is like asking the sea to be less watery. You can try. It will not listen. But still, you walk through the market, doing your duty, reminding people to keep things under control, even as the noise rises again the moment you pass. You are not stopping the chaos. You are gently suggesting that chaos consider being slightly more organized, which it politely ignores. So while ancient Greece gave us trade, commerce, and bustling public life, it also gave us the person whose job was to step into that noise and attempt the impossible, to make people quieter, a role built on optimism and a complete disregard for reality. After all the noise, chaos, and emotional damage, you might be hoping for a job that is calm, quiet, respectful, something involving art perhaps. Good news, this one involves art. Bad news, you are polishing it. Constantly. Welcome to the life of the statue polisher. In ancient Greece, statues were everywhere. Gods, heroes, athletes, important figures, all immortalized in marble or bronze, standing proudly in public spaces, temples and streets. They were symbols of beauty, power, and perfection. And your job? Make sure they stay that way. At first, this sounds peaceful. You arrive early, cloth in hand, maybe a bit of oil or cleaning material, and begin your work. The air is calm, the streets are quiet, just you and a 12-foot-tall statue of a perfectly sculpted human being, who is, more often than not, completely naked. You start polishing, carefully, respectfully, professionally. You avoid eye contact, not that it matters, but still. Now, statues weren't just decorative, they were important. Some represented gods, meaning they had religious significance. Others honoured athletes or political figures. Keeping them clean wasn't just about appearance. It was about respect, dust, dirt, bird-related incidents. All of it had to be removed by you every day, which means you develop a very close, very detailed understanding of marble surfaces. Every curve, every edge, every feature that the sculptor spent months perfecting. You notice things. You wish you didn't notice things, but it's your job. And while the work itself is repetitive, there's also pressure. Damage a statue, scratch it, or clean it improperly, and you're not just ruining art, you're potentially offending an entire community, or a god, which is not great for job security. And let's not forget the public aspect. These statues are not hidden away. People walk by, they watch, occasionally they judge. You are standing there, polishing a very prominent part of a very public sculpture, while trying to maintain the appearance of complete professionalism, which is a skill in itself. So while ancient Greece gave us breathtaking art, idealized beauty, and sculptures that still inspire the world today, it also relied on someone whose job was to stand there with a cloth and make sure those statues didn't look like they'd been ignored for a week. A quiet job, a necessary job, and one that probably made you very, very good at not asking questions. At this point, you might be hoping for a job with better working conditions, maybe something involving food, comfort, conversation, a relaxed environment. Congratulations. You've achieved all of that by not paying for any of it. Welcome to the life of the professional parasite. A person who made a living by attending other people's dinners, eating their food, and somehow convincing everyone it was a fair exchange. In ancient Greece, social dining was a big deal. Banquets and symposia weren't just about food, they were about conversation, entertainment, and status. The right guests could elevate the entire evening. And that's where you come in. You are not invited because you are important. You are invited because you are useful. Your job is to entertain, tell jokes, flatter the host, keep the conversation flowing, make people laugh. Basically, ensure that the evening never becomes awkward. In exchange, you eat a lot. And ideally, you leave before anyone starts questioning the arrangement too deeply. Now, to be good at this job, you need a very specific set of skills. You must be charming, quick-witted, and able to adapt to any situation. One moment you're praising the host's taste in wine. The next, you're telling a story that somehow makes everyone feel slightly more important than they actually are. It's a delicate balance. Too quiet and you're useless. Too loud and you're annoying. Too honest and you're no longer invited. You exist in that perfect middle ground where everyone enjoys your presence, but no one quite remembers why you're there. And let's be honest, this is not a stable career. Your entire livelihood depends on being likable enough to keep getting invited back. One bad joke, one poorly timed comment, and suddenly you're eating alone again, which is not ideal when your business model relies entirely on other people's kitchens. There's also a certain level of dignity you have to quietly ignore, because while you are technically a guest, you are also very aware that you are there in exchange for performance. You are entertainment, edible entertainment, and if the host finds someone funnier, more charming, or slightly less predictable, you might find yourself replaced. So while ancient Greece gave us philosophy, art, and meaningful social gatherings, it also created a role for people whose job was to show up, be charming, and eat as much as possible without technically being freeloaders. A fine line, one that you walk with a full plate. By now you might be thinking, surely we've reached the limit of unnecessary jobs. We haven't. Because at some point in history, someone looked at a perfectly normal chair and thought, what if this is a trap? And instead of solving that problem logically, they hired you. Welcome to the life of the chair tester. In elite households and important settings across ancient Greece, powerful individuals didn't always trust their surroundings. And honestly, given the amount of political tension, rivalries, and general suspicion, that's understandable. What's less understandable is the solution. Before an important person sat down, someone else would test the chair first. You. Your job is to walk up to a chair, a completely ordinary object, and treat it like it might end your entire existence. Poison? Maybe. Hidden mechanism? Possibly. Bad craftsmanship? Also a concern. So you approach carefully. You inspect it, as if you have any real way of knowing what's wrong. Then, with the confidence of someone who absolutely has no backup plan, you sit, and for a brief moment, time stops. Nothing happens. Good. That means the chair is safe. You stand up, nod slightly, and the important person takes your place, as if this entire process is completely reasonable. Now imagine doing this every day. Every chair, every seat, every time. You are essentially a human safety test, except instead of testing products, you are testing your luck. And if something does go wrong, if the chair collapses, if something was hidden, if there actually was danger, you don't get to report the issue. You become the report, which is not ideal for long-term career growth. There's also something deeply humbling about this role. While others discuss politics, philosophy, and power, you are focused on furniture. You are the barrier between confidence and paranoia. And yet no one thanks you, because if everything goes right, nothing happens, which is exactly the goal. So while ancient Greece gave us intellectual breakthroughs, political systems, and cultural achievements that shaped the world, it also gave us a job where your main responsibility was to sit down first, just in case. A role built on trust, or more accurately, a complete lack of it. After everything you've seen, the insults, the chickens, the chairs that may or may not end your life, you might be hoping for a job that feels heroic. And finally, here it is, sort of. Welcome to the life of the message runner. In ancient Greece, there were no phones, no letters delivered overnight, no convenient way to send information quickly. There was only one system. Your job is simple in theory. Take a message from one place and deliver it to another. That's it. No backup. No shortcuts. No, I'll send it later. If the message needs to go somewhere, you run. And you keep running. Across cities, across rough terrain, through heat, dust, and whatever else happens to be in your way that day. You are the notification system. Except if you fail, the consequences are not mild. Now sometimes the messages are routine. Trade information, announcements, maybe a polite request that could have waited but didn't. Other times, not so much. Military orders, urgent warnings, news that could change the course of events entirely. No pressure. And here's the important part. You are not just delivering the message. You are the message. There is no written backup in many cases. You memorize it. You carry it. You become responsible for every word, which means if you forget something, mispronounce something, or arrive too late, that's on you. Imagine running for hours, exhausted, finally reaching your destination, gasping for air, and then realizing you've slightly mixed up a sentence. Not ideal. There's also the physical side of this job. You need endurance, speed, and the ability to keep going even when your body strongly suggests you stop immediately. You don't get to stop. You don't get to complain. You run. And if you're good at it, people rely on you. Important people. Powerful people. The kind of people who expect results, which makes you incredibly valuable, but also very replaceable if something goes wrong. So while ancient Greece gave us communication, coordination, and the ability to share ideas across distances, it also depended on individuals whose job was to carry those ideas on foot. No safety net, no second chances, just you, the road, and a message that absolutely cannot be messed up. A role that sounds heroic, until you realize you don't get the credit, just the distance. Long before the first torch is lit or the first cup of mead is raised, the feast begins in silence, in preparation. Across the lands once known as Gaul, villages stir with purpose. The air carries the scent of smoke, damp earth, and fresh-cut herbs, as if the land itself knows something important is about to happen. For the Celtic Gauls, feasts were never casual gatherings. They were statements of power, loyalty, and survival. Every feast had a reason, even if not everyone fully understood it. Some marked the changing of the seasons, others honoured victories in battle, and many were tied to rituals that blurred the line between the human world and something far older. Preparation begins days in advance. Hunters disappear into the forests, tracking deer or boar with quiet precision. When they return, carrying the weight of their kill, it is more than food. It is proof of strength, skill, and worth. The larger the animal, the louder the unspoken message. Closer to the heart of the village, fires are carefully built, not yet roaring, but waiting. Women grind grain into coarse flour, mix it with water, and prepare simple breads. Herbs are crushed and scattered into stews, while fermented drinks, thick, sour, and strong, are poured into large vessels, ready to dull the senses and loosen tongues. Children watch from the edges, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Even they understand that this is no ordinary night. But beneath the rhythm of preparation lies something more delicate. Hierarchy, because a feast among the Gauls is never equal. Every seat, every portion, every cup is a reflection of status. The strongest warriors expect the finest cuts of meat. Leaders sit closest to the fire. Stories will be told, but not everyone has the right to speak. And so, as the sun begins to fall and shadows stretch across the village, the tension quietly builds. The feast promises celebration, laughter, drink, and unity. But it also carries the risk of pride, rivalry, and insult. Because once the fire is lit, and the meat is carved, what begins as a feast can just as easily become something far more dangerous. As the last light of day fades beyond the hills of Gaul, the village gathers in a slow, deliberate circle. What began as scattered preparation now pulls inward, toward a single point, the fire that has yet to be lit. This moment matters more than the feast itself. Among the Celtic Gauls, fire is not just warmth or light, it is alive. It connects the world of the living with forces unseen, older than memory and far less forgiving, and so it cannot be lit casually. A hush falls. At the centre stands the druid, or sometimes the eldest of the tribe, holding a small ember preserved from a previous sacred flame. This is no ordinary spark. It is continuity. It is the tribe's past, carried into the present. To lose it would be more than an inconvenience. It would feel like breaking a link with the ancestors themselves. The crowd watches closely, not daring to interrupt. The fire is built slowly, carefully. Dry wood is placed in a precise structure, almost ritualistic in its arrangement. Then, with steady hands, the ember is brought forward. For a moment, nothing happens. Just a faint glow in the growing darkness. Then, a flicker. A thin line of smoke rises, curling into the cold evening air. The flame catches, small at first, then stronger. It spreads, feeding on the wood, stretching upward as if reaching for the sky itself. The moment it takes hold, something shifts. The tension breaks, but only slightly. Murmurs ripple through the crowd. Some bow their heads. Others whisper quiet words, offerings spoken under breath. This is not just the start of a feast. It is an invitation to spirits, to ancestors, to whatever watches from beyond the visible world. The fire grows, casting long shadows across faces now glowing in orange light. Every movement becomes sharper, more dramatic, every expression easier to read. And now, with the sacred flame alive, the rules change. This is no longer preparation. This is ritual, because from this point forward, everything that happens, every bite, every drink, every word spoken, is witnessed, not just by those present, but by something far older, sitting just beyond the edge of the firelight, with the sacred fire now alive, its flames rising and cracking into the night. The feast cannot simply begin. Among the Celtic Gauls, nothing is taken before something is given, and so the first offering is prepared. The largest piece of meat, often from the finest animal brought by the hunters, is set aside. It is not for the strongest warrior, nor for the chief. It belongs to something unseen. A silence falls again as the chosen individual, often a druid or respected elder, steps forward toward the fire. The rest of the village watches closely. This is not just a ritual. It is a negotiation. The meat is lifted high for all to see, its value clear. Then, without hesitation, it is placed into the flames. Fat begins to drip, hissing as it meets the fire, sending thick smoke spiraling upward into the dark sky. The smell is rich, almost overwhelming. A feast in itself now surrendered. No one speaks, because in this moment the Gauls are not hosts. They are guests. The offering is believed to reach beyond the physical world, carried by smoke into realms where ancestors linger and gods observe. It is a sign of respect, but also a quiet request for protection, for good harvests, for victory in future battles, or perhaps simply to avoid misfortune. Some whisper prayers, others keep their thoughts locked inside. Not everyone dares to ask for something, but everyone hopes. The flames respond in their own way. They crackle louder, shifting unpredictably, consuming what has been given without hesitation. To some, this is acceptance. To others, it is a reminder that what is offered is gone forever. Only after this moment does the atmosphere begin to change. The strict silence softens. People begin to move again. The fire is no longer just sacred. It is now shared. It has been acknowledged, fed, and, in a sense, satisfied. Now and only now can the feast truly begin. But even as the first portions of food are prepared to be served, a quiet understanding lingers among the crowd. Because if the offering was not enough, the night may demand more. With the offering consumed by flame and smoke, the feast finally shifts from ritual to reward. The fires burn brighter now, no longer distant and sacred, but alive with purpose. Meat is brought forward, roasted, carved, and divided, but not equally. Among the Celtic Gauls, food is not simply shared, it is assigned. And nothing reveals a man's place in the tribe more clearly than what he is given to eat. At the centre of attention lies the most coveted prize, the champion's portion. This is not just any cut of meat. It is the best, the richest, the most honoured piece, often taken from the strongest part of the animal. It is meant for the greatest warrior present, the one who has proven himself in battle, whose strength is unquestioned, whose reputation carries weight. But here is the problem. Strength is not always agreed upon. As the meat is carved and lifted for all to see, the air tightens once again. Eyes shift. Some glance toward the obvious choice. A seasoned warrior, scarred and respected. Others watch a younger man, eager, ambitious, perhaps too eager, because claiming the champion's portion is not just an honour, it is a challenge. In many feasts across ancient Gaul, disputes over this portion were not uncommon. A man could stand, step forward, and declare himself worthy. And if another disagreed, the argument would not remain verbal for long. Steel could be drawn. The feast, for all its celebration, always carried this edge. It was a place where pride lived dangerously close to violence, where a man's hunger was not just for food, but for recognition. Eventually, the portion is claimed. Whether by agreement, intimidation, or silent acceptance, the chosen warrior takes his place near the fire. He eats first, others follow, each receiving their share based on rank, age, and contribution. The hierarchy becomes visible in every bite. Laughter begins to rise again, mixed with the sound of tearing meat and clashing cups. The tension eases, but it does not disappear. It never truly does. Because while the strongest may eat first, there are always others watching, waiting for the moment when strength can be questioned again. Once the meat has been claimed and the first hunger satisfied, the feast begins to shift again. This time into something looser, louder, and far less controlled. The fire still burns at the centre, but now it is surrounded by movement, voices, and the unmistakable sound of liquid being poured. The drinking has begun. Among the Celtic Gauls, drink is not an afterthought. It is the second half of the feast, just as important as the food itself. Large vessels are brought forward, filled with thick, fermented beverages, ale, mead, sometimes wine acquired through trade with distant cultures. The smell is sharp and sweet, heavy in the air. Cups are not delicate things. They are rough, often carved from wood or shaped from metal, passed from hand to hand without ceremony. But like everything else in the feast, even drinking follows an unspoken order. The first cup goes to the highest-ranking individual, a chief, a war leader, or a figure of authority. He raises it slowly, the firelight catching the surface of the drink, and for a brief moment all eyes are on him. Then he drinks, deeply, deliberately, before passing the vessel on. And with that, restraint begins to dissolve. Voices grow louder, laughter spreads more easily, stories are told, often exaggerated, sometimes outright invented. Battles are relived in vivid detail, each telling slightly more heroic than the last. A man who was merely present in a fight may, by his own account, become the reason victory was achieved. No one interrupts. Not yet. Because alcohol does more than relax the body. It sharpens pride. Old rivalries once buried beneath daily life begin to surface. A careless word, a dismissive glance, even the way a cup is handed from one man to another can carry meaning, and meaning can quickly become insult. Still, for now, the feast holds together. The fire crackles, shadows dance, and the rhythm of drinking continues. Cups are refilled, then emptied again. The line between celebration and chaos begins to blur, but it has not yet been crossed. Because there is still something holding it all in place, tradition. But as the night deepens and the drink flows more freely, even tradition begins to loosen its grip. As the drink begins to take hold, the rhythm of the feast changes again. The eating slows, the cups continue to pass, but now something else rises to the surface. The need to be heard. Among the Celtic Gauls, a feast is not just about what you consume, it is about what you prove. And once the body is satisfied, the mind, or perhaps the ego, demands its turn. The first stories begin carefully. An older warrior speaks, his voice steady, recounting a battle from years ago. He describes the clash of shields, the sound of iron striking iron, the moment when fear nearly took him, and how he overcame it. The others listen. They nod. Some have heard this story before, but that does not matter. Repetition is not weakness here. It is reinforcement. Then another voice joins in. A younger man, fueled by drink and ambition, leans forward and begins his own tale. His words come faster, louder, less measured. Where the older warrior spoke of survival, this one speaks of dominance. Every strike lands. Every enemy falls. Every moment paints him not just as brave, but as unstoppable. The difference is clear, and everyone notices. This is where the feast becomes something else entirely. A stage. In the flickering light of the fire, stories are currency. Reputation is built or broken with every sentence. A man who speaks well can elevate himself. A man who stumbles, hesitates, or exaggerates too far risks becoming the subject of quiet laughter, or worse, open mockery. Because listening is not passive. Eyes narrow, smirks appear, someone mutters under their breath. Another shakes his head slightly as if to say, "That's not how it happened." The tension begins to return, subtle but unmistakable. And then come the boasts, not stories of the past, but declarations of the future. Promises of what a man will do, who he will defeat, what glory he will claim. These are the most dangerous words spoken all night, because a boast once made must be defended. And in a gathering like this, surrounded by warriors who remember everything, those words do not disappear with the morning light. They stay, waiting to be tested. As words begin to blur into laughter, and boasts hang heavy in the air, the feast takes another turn, one that pulls the entire gathering into motion. The stillness of storytelling gives way to rhythm. It begins quietly. A single instrument, perhaps a horn, a simple harp, or a drum, breaks through the noise. The sound is low at first, almost lost beneath the voices, but slowly it grows, steady and deliberate, like a heartbeat finding its pace. Among the Celtic Gauls, music is not background. It is a force. It binds the group together, pulling individuals out of their separate thoughts and into a shared moment. The rhythm spreads. Hands begin to tap against wooden tables. Feet strike the ground in uneven but eager patterns. The firelight flickers across moving bodies, turning shadows into something alive, something almost separate from the people casting them. Then someone stands. At first, it is just one person, swaying slightly, lifted by drink and rhythm. But it doesn't stay that way for long. Others follow. Movement spreads through the circle, awkward at first, then more confident. What begins as simple steps becomes something closer to dance, though not in the graceful sense. This is not elegance. This is energy. Warriors stomp heavily, their movements grounded, almost aggressive. Each step feels like it could just as easily belong on a battlefield. Others move more freely, spinning, clapping, shouting in time with the growing rhythm. Laughter mixes with the beat, louder now, less controlled. The feast is no longer contained. It expands outward, pulling everyone into its current. Even those who remain seated are affected. Their heads nod. Their voices rise. The boundaries between groups, between high and low, between respected and overlooked, begin to blur, if only slightly. But only for a moment, because beneath the music, beneath the movement, something else is building. The energy is no longer calm. It is rising, pushing higher, faster, closer to something unpredictable. The same rhythm that brings people together can just as easily drive them apart. A missed step, a shoulder brushed too hard, a laugh taken the wrong way. It doesn't take much, because in a feast like this, where pride has already been stirred and drink has loosened restraint, even joy can turn sharp without warning. And as the music grows louder, so does the risk that it will carry the night somewhere no one can fully control. At its height, the feast feels unstoppable. The fire roars, the music pounds, voices overlap in a chaotic harmony that almost feels alive. For a moment it seems as though nothing could break the energy of the gathering. But among the Celtic Gauls, this is often the most fragile point of all, because this is where control begins to slip. It rarely starts with something obvious, not a sudden attack or a loud declaration. Instead, it begins small, almost invisible, a glance held too long, a laugh that lingers a second too much, a careless word, spoken without thought but heard with full attention. And in a circle where pride has already been sharpened, that is enough. Two men lock eyes across the fire. Perhaps they have history, a past disagreement, a rivalry never fully settled. Or perhaps there is nothing at all. Just the wrong moment, the wrong tone, the wrong interpretation. It does not matter. One speaks. The words are not shouted, but they carry weight. A challenge disguised as a comment. The other responds just as quietly, but with an edge that cannot be ignored. The space between them tightens. Around them the feast continues, but not quite the same. Some notice immediately. Conversations soften, movements slow. Others pretend not to see, choosing instead to keep drinking, to keep laughing, as if ignoring it might make it disappear. It never does. The tension grows, stretching like a rope pulled too tight. And then, inevitably, it snaps. A shove. A cup knocked from a hand. Liquid spills into the dirt, dark and wasted. The music falters. The rhythm breaks. Voices rise, no longer in celebration but in warning. What follows can unfold in seconds. Fists strike first, quick and uncontrolled. But in a gathering of warriors, fists are rarely the end. Hands move toward weapons. Knives, blades, anything within reach. The fire that once united now casts harsh, flickering light on something far more dangerous. Not everyone joins. Some step back, watching carefully. Others move in, not to stop the fight, but to ensure it remains fair, or at least contained. There are rules, even here, unspoken but understood. Still, blood may be drawn, and once that happens, the feast is no longer a celebration. It becomes a test of strength, of loyalty, of who truly belongs at the center of the fire, and who does not. Eventually the fire begins to settle. What once roared high into the night now burns lower, its flames shorter, its crackle softer. The energy that filled the feast, the music, the laughter, the rising tension, has burned itself out, leaving behind something quieter, heavier. The night is not over, but it has changed. Among the Celtic Gauls, the end of a feast is just as important as its beginning, because what remains, when the noise fades and the drink wears off, is truth. Some sit in silence, staring into the glowing embers. Their thoughts are no longer loud. The confidence that came with drink has softened, replaced by reflection, or in some cases, regret. Words spoken too boldly now linger in the mind. Promises made in the heat of the moment feel heavier in the cold light of what comes next. Others do not reflect at all. They lie where they fell, overcome by exhaustion or drink, their breathing slow, their bodies still. Around them, the remains of the feast scatter the ground. Bones stripped of meat, overturned cups, dark stains in the dirt where drink or blood has been spilled. And then there are those who carry marks of the night, a cut across the arm, a bruise forming along the jaw, small reminders of how quickly celebration turned into conflict. These wounds are not hidden. They are seen, acknowledged. In some ways, they are proof that a man stood his ground, that he did not back away. But proof comes with consequence. As the fire dims further, a quiet understanding settles over the group. The feast may be ending, but its impact will not. Rivalries sparked or reignited will carry into the days ahead. Boasts will be remembered, and in time, they will be tested. Respect may have been earned or lost. Nothing disappears with the smoke. Somewhere beyond the fading light, the world waits. The same world that demanded strength, loyalty, and survival before the feast ever began. And now, as the last flames flicker and the first hints of dawn approach, each person rises, slowly, quietly, to return to it. Because the feast was never an escape, it was a mirror, and in its fire-lit glow, everyone saw exactly who they were. Long before sushi became a symbol of precision, elegance, and culinary art, it began as something far more practical and far less appealing to modern taste. Its origins do not lie in the refined kitchens of Japan, but much earlier, in the humid regions of Southeast Asia, where survival depended on finding ways to preserve food for as long as possible. Fish, once caught, did not last long. Without salt or preservation, it would spoil quickly, becoming useless within days. For communities that relied heavily on rivers and coastal waters, this was a constant problem. And so, a solution emerged. Simple, effective, and surprisingly strange by today's standards. Fresh fish was cleaned, heavily salted, and then packed tightly into containers of cooked rice. Over time, something remarkable happened. The rice began to ferment, producing lactic acid that slowed down bacterial growth and preserved the fish. This process could take weeks, even months. The longer it sat, the stronger the smell and flavor became. But here is the key detail. The rice was not meant to be eaten. Once the fermentation was complete, the rice, now sour, broken down and pungent, was thrown away. Only the fish remained, preserved and edible, carrying a sharp, intense taste that people came to accept, even appreciate. This early form is known today as narazushi, and it was not created for pleasure. It was created out of necessity. Over time, this method spread, eventually reaching Japan, where it would begin to evolve. At first, the process remained the same. Long fermentation, discarded rice, preserved fish. But gradually something began to change. People started to experiment. The fermentation time was shortened, the flavors became milder, and most importantly, the rice, once considered nothing more than a preservation tool, began to be eaten alongside the fish. What had once been a byproduct became part of the meal itself. This shift may seem small, but it marked a turning point. Because in that moment, sushi stopped being just a method of survival and started becoming something intentional, something crafted. The idea that food could be preserved and enjoyed at the same time began to take hold. And from that quiet transformation, sushi began its long journey, from necessity to tradition, and eventually to art. As the preservation method spread into Japan, something subtle, but important, began to change. What started as a technique to keep fish from spoiling slowly evolved into something people actually wanted to eat, not just tolerate. At first, the process remained long and patient. Fish was still packed into fermented rice and left for months, sometimes even longer. The result was strong, sour, and deeply pungent. This form, known as narazushi, was not for everyone. It demanded a certain acceptance of smell, of texture, of intensity. But over time, people grew used to it. In some regions, they even began to prefer it. Still, the process had a problem. It took too long. Waiting months for food was not always practical, especially as communities grew and demand increased. And so, people began to experiment. Not by abandoning the method, but by speeding it up. The fermentation time was shortened. Instead of letting the rice break down completely, it was allowed to remain partially intact. This meant the fish was less intensely preserved, but it also meant the rice was no longer completely ruined. It still carried a sourness, but it was edible. And for the first time, people began to eat both together. This version, often referred to as namanare, represented a transition. It was no longer just about preserving fish. It was about creating a meal. The rice and fish started to complement each other, rather than exist in separate roles. The flavor changed. It became milder, more balanced. The harsh edge of long fermentation softened into something more approachable. The texture improved. The smell became less overwhelming. What had once been a necessity began to resemble something closer to a choice. And with that change, sushi moved one step further away from survival and closer to cuisine. But this transformation did not happen overnight. Some still preferred the older, stronger versions. Others embraced the newer style, appreciating the quicker preparation and more subtle taste. For a time, both existed side by side, reflecting different preferences, different regions, and different ways of thinking about food. Yet the direction was clear. People no longer wanted to wait months. They wanted something faster, fresher, more immediate. And that desire for speed without losing flavour would soon push sushi into its next most recognizable form. As tastes began to shift in Japan, patience started to lose its place at the table. The long months of fermentation that once defined sushi no longer matched the pace of everyday life. People wanted something quicker, something that could be prepared and eaten without waiting seasons for it to be ready. And so the transformation accelerated. Instead of relying on time to create that signature sourness, cooks began using something far more immediate: vinegar. By mixing vinegar into freshly cooked rice, they could recreate the tangy flavour of fermentation in a fraction of the time. What once took months could now be achieved in minutes. This was a turning point, because for the first time, sushi no longer depended on preservation at all. It became something fresh, something made to be eaten immediately, not stored away. The rice was no longer breaking down, the fish was no longer aged. Everything was prepared in the present. This new style became known as hayazushi, fast sushi. And with speed came creativity. Rice could now be shaped, pressed, or layered in different ways. Fish could be added fresh, marinated, or lightly cured. Ingredients that had never been part of the old preservation method began to appear. Vegetables, seaweed, even cooked elements started to find their place. Sushi was no longer a single technique. It was becoming a category. Different regions began to develop their own variations. Some preferred pressed sushi, where rice and fish were compacted into molds. Others created layered versions, almost like edible arrangements. The structure changed, the presentation evolved, and the experience became more refined. But something else changed too. Sushi became more social. It was no longer something prepared in advance and eaten quietly. It could be made quickly, shared easily, and enjoyed in the moment. It fit into gatherings, markets, and daily life in a way the old versions never could. Still, even with all this progress, sushi had not yet reached its most iconic form. There was one more step. Because while hayazushi made sushi faster, it was still not quite what people today would recognize. The simplicity, the elegance, the combination of vinegared rice and fresh fish placed together with precision. That moment had not yet arrived, but it was close, and when it did, it would change sushi forever. By the time sushi reached the bustling city of Edo, everything was ready for its final transformation. The city was growing fast, crowded, energetic, and constantly moving. People did not have time to wait for elaborate meals. They needed something quick, satisfying, and easy to eat. And sushi adapted. What had once been a slow, evolving tradition now became street food. Vendors began setting up small stalls along busy roads, near markets, and by the waterfront. Fresh fish was brought in daily from the nearby bay, still glistening, still carrying the scent of the sea. Rice, now seasoned with vinegar, was prepared in batches, ready to be shaped at a moment's notice. This is where nigiri was born. A simple idea, but a powerful one. A small portion of rice pressed by hand, topped with a slice of fish. No long preparation, no complicated structure, just balance. Rice and fish combined in a single bite. Fast, portable, immediate, perfect for a city like Edo. Workers, merchants, and travellers would stop briefly at these stalls, eat a few pieces, and move on. There was no ceremony, no waiting. Sushi was no longer reserved for special occasions or careful preparation. It had become part of daily life, but even in its simplicity, there was skill. The way the rice was shaped, not too tight, not too loose. The way the fish was sliced, clean, precise, just thick enough to complement the rice without overwhelming it. The balance had to be exact. Too much pressure, and the rice would harden. Too little, and it would fall apart. Every movement mattered, and while it looked effortless, it was anything but. Some vendors began to stand out. Their sushi tasted better, their technique sharper, their balance more refined. People would return again and again, not just for the convenience, but for the experience. Without realizing it, sushi had crossed another line. It was no longer just food. It was becoming craft. And in the crowded streets of Edo, surrounded by noise, movement, and constant demand, sushi found its identity. Simple in appearance, but deeply precise in execution, a form that would endure almost unchanged for centuries to come. As sushi settled into the fast-moving streets of Edo, something unexpected began to happen. What started as quick, convenient street food slowly began to demand something more: precision, consistency, and above all, skill. At first glance, nigiri seemed simple: rice pressed by hand, fish placed on top, served in seconds. But simplicity can be deceptive. As competition grew among vendors, small differences began to matter. One stall's rice might be slightly warmer, another's fish slightly fresher. Some vendors handled the rice gently, allowing it to remain soft and airy. Others pressed too hard, turning it dense and heavy. Customers noticed. And in a city where choices were everywhere, those small differences decided who succeeded and who faded away. Technique became everything. The best sushi makers learned to shape rice with just the right pressure, firm enough to hold together, soft enough to melt apart when eaten. They learned how to slice fish in a single, clean motion, preserving its texture and flavor. Even the temperature mattered. Rice could not be too hot, or it would ruin the fish. Not too cold, or it would lose its softness. Every detail counted, and slowly, the role of the sushi vendor began to change. No longer just a seller of quick meals, he became something closer to a craftsman. His stall was still simple, but his work required focus, repetition, and an understanding that went beyond basic preparation. Over time, experience separated the average from the exceptional. Customers began to trust certain hands. They would return to the same vendor, not just for convenience, but for quality. Reputations spread quietly. Through word of mouth, through consistent taste, through the subtle understanding that this person knew what they were doing. At the same time, sushi itself was evolving. Ingredients expanded. Some fish were marinated or lightly cured to enhance flavor. Others were brushed with sauces or paired with small touches like wasabi. These additions were not random. They were deliberate, carefully chosen to bring balance to each piece. And with every small refinement, sushi moved further away from its origins as preserved fish, and deeper into something more refined, something controlled, something practiced. Because by now sushi was no longer just about speed, it was about mastery. As technique sharpened and expectations grew, sushi in Japan began to demand something more than practice. It demanded discipline. What had once been a skill learned through repetition on the street slowly transformed into something deeper, a path. Becoming a sushi master was no longer simple. It began with apprenticeship. Young learners would enter under an experienced chef, not to immediately make sushi, but to observe, clean, and repeat basic tasks for years. They washed rice endlessly, learning how water affected its texture. They prepared fish, understanding how different cuts changed flavor. For a long time, they were not even allowed to touch the final product. This was not punishment. It was training. Because sushi, in its refined form, required more than speed. It required intuition, knowing exactly how much pressure to apply when shaping rice, how to adjust based on the temperature of the room, how to sense the freshness of fish with a glance or touch. These things could not be rushed. Time, once removed from the preparation of sushi itself, returned in the making of the chef. Years passed before an apprentice could stand behind the counter and serve a customer. And when that moment came, every movement was watched, every detail judged. The role of the sushi maker had changed. He was no longer hidden behind a stall, quickly assembling food for passing customers. He stood in front of them, working in full view. His hands moved with precision, calm and controlled, each piece prepared individually. There was no room for error. Customers did not just eat the sushi, they observed the process. They trusted the chef to choose the best fish, to prepare it correctly, to serve it at the perfect moment. The relationship became personal, almost silent, built on consistency and respect. And with that shift, sushi itself became more than food. It became an experience, a reflection of the chef's skill, discipline, and understanding. Each piece carried his decisions, how it was shaped, how it was cut, how it was served. By now, sushi had traveled far from its origins as preserved fish packed in rice. It had become something precise, something intentional, something that could not be rushed, even in a world that once demanded speed above all else. For centuries, sushi remained closely tied to Japan, shaped by its traditions, its discipline, and its quiet precision. But as the modern world began to connect across oceans, sushi did something it had never done before. It left. At first, the movement was slow. Japanese migrants carried their food culture with them, opening small restaurants in distant places. In cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco, sushi began to appear, not as a global trend, but as something unfamiliar, even strange. Raw fish was not easily accepted. For many, the idea of eating uncooked seafood seemed risky, even unappealing. Sushi in its traditional form felt too foreign, too simple, too different from what people were used to, and for a time it remained on the edges, known mostly within Japanese communities. But adaptation began again. Just as sushi had changed in its early history, it started to evolve once more. This time to fit new tastes. Ingredients were adjusted. Presentation shifted. New combinations appeared, blending traditional technique with local preferences. One of the most important changes came in the form of the roll. Instead of simple nigiri, sushi was now wrapped, layered, and sometimes turned inside out. Ingredients like avocado, cucumber, and cooked seafood were added, making it more approachable. Flavors became softer, textures more familiar. The goal was clear: make sushi easier to accept. And it worked. Slowly, curiosity replaced hesitation. People tried it, then tried it again. What once seemed strange began to feel interesting, then enjoyable, and eventually normal. Restaurants expanded, menus grew, sushi moved from niche to mainstream. But with that growth came a question. What happens when something so precise, so rooted in tradition, begins to change so quickly? Some saw it as progress, proof that sushi could adapt, survive, and thrive anywhere. Others saw it as a loss, a drifting away from the discipline and simplicity that defined it. Both were right. Because as sushi spread across the world, it became something new, not just a Japanese tradition, but a global one, and in that transformation, it gained reach, while quietly risking the loss of the very identity that made it special in the first place. As sushi spread across the world, its identity began to split. On one side stood tradition, rooted deeply in Japan, shaped by discipline, restraint, and centuries of refinement. On the other side stood innovation, bold, experimental, and constantly evolving to match new tastes and cultures, and the gap between them grew. In traditional sushi, every detail has purpose. The rice is seasoned carefully, the fish selected with precision. The balance between the two treated almost like a rule that cannot be broken. Nothing is added without reason. Nothing is exaggerated. The goal is harmony, a quiet perfection that does not need attention to be understood. But outside Japan, that approach began to change. Sushi rolls became larger, more complex, filled with multiple ingredients at once. Sauces were added, sweet, spicy, sometimes overwhelming. Toppings expanded beyond fish, to include everything from fried elements to unexpected combinations that would have once seemed unthinkable. Flavor became louder, presentation became more dramatic, and for many people this was exactly what made sushi exciting. But not everyone agreed. Traditionalists saw something different. They saw balance being lost. The simplicity that once defined sushi was being replaced by excess. Where there was once subtlety, there was now intensity. Where there was once control, there was now experimentation. To them, it felt like something important was slipping away. Yet innovation had its own argument. Without change, sushi might have remained limited, appreciated by few, understood by even fewer. By adapting, it reached millions. It became accessible. It invited people in, even if the first step was through something far from traditional. And so, both versions continued to exist side by side. In one restaurant, a chef carefully prepares each piece with minimal ingredients, honoring tradition with every movement. In another, rolls are crafted with bold flavors and creative combinations designed to surprise and impress. Neither disappears, because sushi by now is no longer one thing. It is a spectrum, a balance between what it was and what it is becoming. And that balance, fragile, constantly shifting, defines sushi in the modern world. After centuries of change, from preservation to street food, from craft to global phenomenon, sushi has become something more than a dish. It carries layers of history within something that can be eaten in a single bite. In Japan, sushi is still treated with a quiet respect, not because it is complicated, but because it is controlled. Each piece reflects decisions: the choice of fish, the temperature of the rice, the pressure of the hand. Nothing is accidental. Even the smallest detail is intentional. But outside of Japan, sushi has taken on new meanings. For some, it is convenience, something quick, light, and easy to eat. For others, it is an experience, a meal shared, photographed, remembered. In some places, it is luxury. In others, it is everyday food. The same concept interpreted in completely different ways. And yet, at its core, something remains unchanged. Sushi has always been about balance. It began as a balance between time and preservation. Then it became a balance between rice and fish. Later, it became a balance between speed and skill. And now it exists between tradition and innovation, constantly shifting but never settling completely on one side. That is what makes it unique, because sushi is not frozen in history. It moves. It adapts. It reflects the people who make it and the cultures that embrace it. At times it becomes simpler, at others more complex, but it never fully loses its identity. Still, there is a quiet truth behind it all. The best sushi is often the simplest. Not the largest roll, not the most elaborate creation, but the one where everything feels just right. Where nothing overpowers anything else. Where the rice and fish exist in perfect proportion, even if that moment lasts only a second. And perhaps that is the real story of sushi. Not just how it changed over time, but how it continues to hold on to something essential, no matter where it goes. Because in the end, sushi is not defined by where it started or how far it has travelled. It is defined by that single bite, and whether, in that brief moment, everything comes together exactly as it should. Long before the wine flows and the streets erupt into song, the festival begins with a quiet but unmistakable shift in the air. Across the city of Athens, daily life starts to loosen. Markets buzz louder than usual. Conversations linger, and people glance toward the roads leading into the city, as if expecting something, or someone. Because this is not just a festival, it is an arrival. The celebration is dedicated to Dionysus, a god unlike the others of the Greek world. Where others represent order, law, or reason, Dionysus represents the opposite: chaos, emotion, transformation. He is the god who breaks boundaries, who dissolves restraint, who invites people to step outside themselves. And during this festival, he is not simply remembered. He is welcomed. The ritual begins with a procession. A statue of Dionysus, often carved in wood and decorated with vines and cloth, is brought into the city from the countryside. It is not treated as decoration. It is treated as presence, as if the god himself is entering Athens. People gather along the path, watching closely. Some follow behind the procession, others walk beside it, singing or chanting. There is a rhythm to the movement, slow and deliberate, building anticipation with every step. Musicians play flutes and drums, their sound echoing through the streets, drawing more people into the flow. But even in this structured beginning, there is something unusual. The mood is not entirely solemn. There are smiles, laughter, moments of excitement that would feel out of place in other religious rituals, because Dionysus is not a god of strict reverence. He is a god of experience. To honor him is not just to bow your head, but to feel something, deeply, fully, without restraint. And that is what the city is preparing for, as the procession moves forward, and the statue is carried into its place. The boundary between ordinary life and festival begins to fade. The rules that govern behavior, speech, and even identity start to loosen. Because once Dionysus has arrived, nothing remains entirely under control. With the arrival of Dionysus now complete, the city of Athens does not return to stillness. Instead, it expands. What began as a formal welcome transforms into something far more alive. A procession that no longer belongs only to priests or officials, but to everyone. The people step forward. From every part of the city, they gather into the streets, forming a moving river of bodies, voices, and sound. This is not a silent march. It is loud, rhythmic, and filled with energy that grows with every step. Music leads the way, flutes, drums, and voices blending together into something that feels less like a performance and more like a shared pulse. And at the center of it all is the phallus, carried openly through the streets, often exaggerated in size and decorated with garlands. It is not hidden or treated with embarrassment. It is celebrated. A symbol of fertility, life, and creation, it represents the power that Dionysus embodies, the force that drives growth, desire, and renewal. People laugh. They sing songs that would never be sung on ordinary days, crude, playful, sometimes openly mocking. Social boundaries begin to blur. Citizens, foreigners, even those of lower status all move within the same space, sharing in something that feels temporarily equal. This is part of the ritual, because the festival is not just about honoring a god, it is about stepping outside the normal order of things. For a short time, the rules loosen, speech becomes freer, behavior becomes bolder. What would usually be restrained is allowed to surface, masks appear. Some participants cover their faces, becoming something else. Not entirely themselves, not entirely someone new. This transformation is subtle at first, but it matters. Identity begins to shift. The individual blends into the collective, and the collective grows stronger. The procession moves through the city, not with a strict destination, but with momentum. It draws people in, pulls them along, builds a shared energy that feels almost impossible to resist. By now, the festival is no longer just beginning. It is unfolding. And with every step, every song, every burst of laughter, the distance between control and chaos grows smaller, carried forward by the people themselves. As the procession winds through the streets of Athens, the energy no longer needs to be guided. It moves on its own. The music continues, the crowd thickens, and somewhere along the way, the wine begins to flow. At first, it is shared carefully. Cups are passed from hand to hand, filled from large vessels carried through the crowd. The drink is dark, rich, slightly diluted with water, as was customary in the Greek world. But even diluted, its effect is steady. It warms the body, softens the edges of thought, and loosens the tight grip of restraint. And that is exactly the point. Because for the followers of Dionysus, wine is not just a drink. It is a tool, a way to move beyond the ordinary limits of the self, a way to feel something deeper, something less controlled, something closer to the divine. More cups are poured. The pace increases. Laughter grows louder. Conversations overlap, then dissolve into fragments of sound and gesture. The structured movement of the procession begins to break apart, replaced by smaller groups, clusters of people drawn together by rhythm, drink, and shared energy. And with that shift, boundaries begin to fall. People speak more freely. Words that would normally be held back are now said without hesitation. Jokes become sharper, bolder. Insults may be thrown, but often with laughter, not anger. The usual rules of behavior, respect, restraint, careful speech, begin to lose their hold. For a moment, everyone feels lighter, but there is something else beneath it. The more the wine flows, the thinner the line becomes between freedom and loss of control. What begins as joy can turn unpredictable. A laugh can become too loud. A gesture too rough. A moment of closeness can shift into tension without warning. And yet this risk is not avoided. It is embraced. Because the festival is not meant to be safe, it is meant to push limits. To take people out of their normal roles and place them in a space where identity itself feels less fixed. The city, once structured and controlled, now moves in waves of sound and motion. And as the wine continues to pass from hand to hand, the question becomes harder to ignore. At what point does release become something else entirely? As the energy of wine and movement spreads through Athens, the festival begins to gather itself again. Not into silence, but into focus. The streets, once chaotic with procession and song, now direct their energy toward a single place. The theatre. Built into the slope of the hill beneath the Acropolis, the Theatre of Dionysus is not just a venue. It is a sacred space. Here, the spirit of Dionysus takes on a different form, not through drink or movement, but through performance. Crowds begin to fill the seats. Thousands gather, settling into the stone tiers, their voices blending into a low, constant murmur. The atmosphere is still alive with the energy of the festival, but it is changing. The wildness of the streets gives way to anticipation. Something is about to begin, and when it does, the city watches. Actors step onto the stage, wearing masks that transform their faces into something larger than human. These masks are not simple disguises. They allow one person to become many. Heroes, kings, gods, and victims. Identity shifts again, but this time with purpose. The plays begin. Stories unfold. Tragedies, comedies, and satyr plays. Each one tied in some way to the themes of Dionysus. Life and death. Order and chaos. Joy and suffering. The same forces felt in the streets now appear in structured form, shaped into narrative. The crowd reacts. They laugh at the absurdity of comedy, where rules are mocked and authority is questioned. They fall into silence during tragedy, watching characters face fate, loss, and inevitable downfall. Emotions rise and fall, not randomly, but guided, controlled, experienced together. This is not just entertainment, it is release, but in a different way. Where wine loosened the body, theatre reaches the mind. It allows the audience to confront things that are normally hidden. Fear, grief, desire, but within a story, at a distance that makes it bearable. And yet, even here, Dionysus remains present. Because beneath the structure of the plays, the same question lingers. What happens when control is lost? When identity breaks? When the line between reality and illusion disappears? The actors perform, the audience watches, but in the shifting faces behind the masks, and the emotions rising in the crowd, the boundary between them begins to blur, and once again, the festival moves closer to something deeper, something not entirely safe, but impossible to resist. As the performances unfold in the theatre of Athens, something deeper begins to take hold, not just in the actors, but in everyone watching. The masks worn on stage are no longer confined to the performers. Their meaning starts to spread outward, because in the Festival of Dionysus, identity is never fixed. The actors, hidden behind carefully crafted masks, become more than themselves. A single man can transform into a grieving mother, a doomed king, or even a god. The voice changes, the posture shifts. The audience does not see the person beneath, they see the role. And strangely, they accept it completely. But the transformation does not stop at the stage. In the crowd, people begin to feel it too. The emotions stirred by the plays, grief, laughter, fear, do not stay contained within the story. They move through the audience, connecting one person to another. A man who would normally remain reserved may laugh freely. Another may feel the weight of tragedy more deeply than he expects. For a moment, people are no longer entirely themselves. This is the power of the mask. It allows distance. It creates space between who someone is and what they can express. And in that space, something new can emerge, something that might otherwise remain hidden. Outside the theatre, this idea continues. Participants in the festival wear their own disguises, simple or elaborate. Faces are covered, identities blurred. A citizen becomes anonymous. A stranger becomes familiar. Social roles begin to dissolve, just as they did in the procession, but now with greater intensity. The difference between actor and audience fades. Everyone is part of the performance, and with that comes a kind of freedom, but also a risk. Without clear identity, responsibility becomes less certain. Words are spoken more freely. Actions feel less tied to consequence. What begins as transformation can slip into something less controlled, yet this is not accidental. It is the essence of Dionysus, to step outside the self, to explore what lies beyond the boundaries of normal life, to experience something that cannot be reached through order alone. But as the masks remain in place, both on stage and in the crowd, one question quietly emerges. When the festival ends, who are you supposed to be again? As the performances continue in the theatre of Athens, one presence becomes impossible to ignore. Not a single actor, but a group, the chorus. They stand together, moving as one, speaking with a unified voice that rises and falls in rhythm. Unlike the main characters, they are not individuals with separate identities. They represent something larger, the people, the city, the shared consciousness of those watching. And in a festival dedicated to Dionysus, that matters. Because while the actors tell the story, the chorus feels it. They react to events on stage, expressing fear, joy, confusion, or dread. They question what is happening, sometimes guiding the audience's understanding, sometimes reflecting it. When tragedy unfolds, they mourn. When chaos rises, they tremble. Their voice carries emotion, not just information, and the audience listens, not because the chorus explains everything, but because it connects everything. It bridges the distance between the story and the people watching it. It takes the emotions of the stage and echoes them back into the crowd, making them impossible to ignore. But something else begins to happen. The line between the chorus and the audience starts to blur. The rhythm of their speech, the movement of their bodies, the intensity of their voice. It begins to pull the crowd in. People lean forward. Some begin to mirror the energy, their own reactions aligning with what they see and hear. The experience becomes shared, not just observed, but felt together. This is the power of the collective. In everyday life, individuals move separately, each with their own concerns, their own identity. But here, in the space of the festival, something different takes shape. People begin to feel as part of something larger. A group, a community, a single emotional current moving through many bodies. And in that current, individuality weakens. This can be comforting. There is strength in belonging, in shared experience, but it also carries a quiet danger. When the group becomes stronger than the individual, control becomes harder to maintain. Emotion spreads faster. Reactions intensify. The same force that unites can overwhelm. And as the chorus continues, their voices rising into the open air, the question becomes clearer. At what point does the crowd stop watching and start becoming part of the story itself? As daylight fades over Athens, the structured world of the theatre begins to dissolve. The plays have stirred the mind, the chorus has unified the crowd, and the wine has already loosened restraint. Now, as darkness settles in, the festival moves into its most unpredictable phase. The night belongs to Dionysus. Torches are lit across the city, their flames flickering against stone walls and moving bodies. Shadows stretch and distort, turning familiar faces into something harder to recognize. The order of the day, the rules, the structure, the roles, begins to fade completely. What replaces it is intensity. Groups gather, not in fixed positions, but in shifting clusters. Music returns, louder now, faster, driven by drums and pipes that pulse through the darkness. The rhythm is not gentle. It demands movement. Feet strike the ground. Bodies sway, then spin. What begins as dancing quickly becomes something less controlled, something closer to release. Voices rise, not in measured speech, but in cries, chants, laughter that carries too far into the night. The influence of wine deepens, but it is no longer the only force at work. There is something else. A shared energy, almost contagious, moving from one person to another. This is what the Greeks called ecstasis, to stand outside oneself. In this state, the boundaries of identity begin to break down. People lose their sense of individual control, becoming part of something larger, something harder to define. The self loosens. Emotion takes over. Reason steps back. For some, it feels like freedom. For others, it feels like danger. Movements grow more intense. Gestures sharper. A simple dance can become frantic. A shout can turn into something closer to a scream. The energy does not settle. It builds, feeding on itself, rising higher with every moment. And yet, this is not seen as chaos alone. It is sacred. To lose control, even briefly, is to come closer to Dionysus. To experience what lies beyond order, beyond structure, beyond the limits of ordinary life. It is a kind of connection, not calm but overwhelming. But there is always a cost. Because the further one moves from control, the harder it becomes to return. And as the night deepens, and the fires burn brighter against the darkness, the question grows heavier in the air. How far can this go before something breaks? By now, the festival has moved far from its ordered beginnings. In the torchlit darkness of Athens, the energy no longer feels guided. It feels unleashed. The music pounds without pause. The voices blur into a constant roar, and the boundaries that once held everything together have thinned to almost nothing. This is the edge. The moment where the presence of Dionysus is felt most strongly. Not in calm reverence, but in intensity. In movement that no longer follows rhythm. In speech that no longer follows thought. For some, this is the peak. They move without hesitation, carried entirely by the moment. Their actions are no longer calculated. Their awareness narrows to sensation, the heat of the fire, the pressure of the crowd, the sound of drums echoing through their body. In this state, they are not thinking. They are reacting, but not everyone experiences it the same way. At the edges of the gathering, some begin to pull back. They watch instead of join. The same energy that draws others in begins to feel overwhelming. What once felt like freedom now carries a hint of something else. Something unpredictable. Something that cannot be controlled. Because at this point, small things matter more than they should. A push in the crowd, a misstep, a glance taken the wrong way. Without the usual structure to contain them, these moments can expand quickly. Voices rise sharper now. Laughter turns uneven. Movements lose coordination. The line between celebration and conflict becomes dangerously thin. And yet, this is not seen as failure. It is part of the experience. The Festival of Dionysus is not meant to remain safe or perfectly balanced. It is meant to push limits, to reveal what lies beneath the surface of controlled behavior. It shows how quickly order can dissolve, how easily identity can shift, how fragile restraint truly is. Still, there is an unspoken understanding. The edge must not be crossed completely, because beyond it lies something that cannot be easily undone. And as the night reaches its most intense point, with firelight flickering across faces that no longer look entirely familiar, the question becomes unavoidable. Who decides when it is time to pull back? Eventually the night begins to give way. The fires that once burned high now settle into glowing embers. The music fades, not all at once, but in fragments. A drum slowing, a voice trailing off, a final echo disappearing into the early morning air. Across Athens, the intensity of the festival begins to loosen its grip. Not suddenly, but inevitably. Those who had moved without restraint now slow, their bodies heavy, their movements uncertain. The same energy that carried them through the night begins to drain, leaving behind exhaustion and something quieter. The heightened emotions, once overwhelming, begin to settle into something more distant, more difficult to define. And slowly, awareness returns. People begin to notice where they are again. The crowd feels less like a single force and more like individuals standing side by side. Faces become familiar once more. Voices soften. The sense of losing oneself begins to reverse. Identity comes back. This is the final stage of the festival, the return. For all its chaos, the celebration of Dionysus is never meant to be permanent. The loss of control, the breaking of boundaries, the stepping outside of the self, all of it is temporary. It is an experience, not a new state of being, because life must continue. As dawn approaches, the city begins to reassemble itself. Same streets that carried music and movement now grow quieter. People leave in small groups or alone, walking back into the routines they had briefly abandoned. But something has changed, even if it cannot be clearly named. The festival leaves behind traces, not just in memory but in perspective. Those who participated have seen what lies beyond order, even if only for a moment. They have felt what it means to lose control, to be part of something larger, to step outside the boundaries that normally define them. And now they return to those boundaries, not because they are forced to, but because they understand why they exist. The city stands again, structured and controlled. Roles are resumed, behavior returns to normal, but beneath it all, there is a quiet awareness. That order is not absolute, that it can break, and that, somewhere beneath the surface of everyday life, the spirit of Dionysus is always waiting for the moment it is invited back again.